I will be moderating the hour-long debate. We ask the crowd be respectful. We ask you to give cheers or jeers at the beginning, but not during the debate. Kind of act like your mom is watching you. Now, the candidates have not seen the questions. I helped organize them along with the League of Women Voters, Greater Omaha, and the Omaha Press Club. The candidates have agreed to the set of rules put together by the Press Club and the League of Women Voters. Plus, the idea is that they are tasked with fact-checking each other in terms of policy and positional nuances. All right, now is your time to be loud. Let's meet the candidates. This is a sequel, right, from 2 years ago. The Democratic challenger, State Senator Tony Vargas. Thanks for being here. And the Republican four-term incumbent, Don Bacon.
A journalist is calling me right now.
Gentlemen, let's debate. A coin flip determined the order. Let's talk the economy, shall we? Today, U.S. employers added 254,000 jobs. Economists say it's a sign the economic growth is solid. Federal Reserve just lowered interest rates with the idea that inflation is under control. Help me understand how, as a congressman, you would make my life better. Don't tell me what others won't do. What would you do? State Senator Tony Vargas, you have 90 seconds.
So one, I want to say thank you for moderating this, and for all the individuals that are here from all different parts of Nebraska, for making sure participating in democracy. Also, thank you to Congressman Bacon for participating in one of our 3 debates. I just want to start off with saying a little bit about where I come from. I'm the proud son of immigrants. This is my mother over here, and they're very important to me, my parents. They're the reason why I became a school board member, the reason why I became a state senator, why I was a former public school science teacher. They're also the reason why I care about working class, middle class individuals, because I know what people are going through. We faced it in my household. We're facing it as working class parents, my wife and Ava and Luca. And I know that because I've worked in the legislature for the last 8 years working on lowering the cost of living. I've been a member of the Budget Appropriations Committee. We've balanced budgets. We've made sure not only to cut costs and reduce spending, but I've also voted for $6 billion worth of tax relief that's actually passed, and 2 of the largest tax packages in state history. It was even named the Taxpayer Defender. I think that our economy is important for us to invest in. It's why I want to create jobs. It's why I want to invest in education and higher education. But it also matters when we reduce our spending at the federal level, and I have a record of doing so in the legislature in Nebraska. But it matters when we have opportunities to have different leadership. And unfortunately for Congressman Bacon, he has voted to increase taxes on Nebraskans. He's actually voted to take away the opportunity for coverage for 700,000 Nebraskans' pre-existing conditions. And he's actually made it harder for people to afford prescription drugs. I think that matters, and this is the reason why we're running.
Congressman Bacon, what would you do? All right, folks, the debate started. What would you do to make life better for voters?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, the League of Women Voters. Appreciate Tony being here. I do want to recognize my wife of 40 years. Appreciate her support, all the 16 assignments and four terms of doing this. The number one issue facing our country is the economy. Why? Because we had the worst inflation in 40 years. Inflation outpaced wages significantly. The average person in this room, the average American, is 4.2% poorer today than they were 4 years ago. So what are we going to do about it? Well, first of all, the administration, when it had Democratic control, passed $3 trillion of supplemental spending that created this terrible inflation. So under the Republican Congress, we've been able to stop that crazy spending. We got inflation back down. We need to control spending. I'm going to support tax cuts for those on Social Security. We're going to extend the tax cuts that have helped out the middle class. But a few things. Tony says he's from the working class. The working class does not miss 20% of their votes. They show up to work. He has missed 20% of the votes in 8 years. He says he's a taxpayer defender. He got that once in 8 years. That's 12.5% of the time. That is a poor record defending taxpayers. And he says $6 billion in tax cuts. Well, he voted against them every step of the way. and then voted for him at the very end. The senators are here today will attest to that. But he did propose the largest tax increase in the history of this state. It would have made us from the 29th highest income tax state to the 5th. That's his record.
Senator Vargas, you have 30 seconds.
One, I was named a taxpayer defender by a conservative organization. I voted for $6 billion with the tax relief that passed. I've balanced budgets and have been proud to pass more than 65 bills in the legislature that Republican colleagues of mine voted across the aisle to support. I think it matters when we actually look at also the record of Congressman Bacon. It's frustrating when he votes to increase taxes on working class families, when he increases our deficit and continues to vote against lowering prescription and health care costs for Nebraskans.
Congressman Bacon, 30 seconds.
This is not true. He's reading some kind of left-wing website. So I voted for tax decreases. In 2017, we voted to decrease taxes on people earning $50,000 by 20%. $100,000 earners got 16% tax reduction. And I believe in making our health care more affordable. That's why I've supported the 340B program that our hospitals need for cheaper medicines that are prescribed to them. So I have a good record. The fact is, though, he got that taxpayer defender one time in 8 years. 12.5% of the time is not a good taxpayer defender score.
The next question focuses on younger voters. Yesterday, a federal judge opened the door for student loan forgiveness, taking on a lawsuit that was brought by 7 Republican-led states. It really could affect every 3 or 4 student loan holders. Average Nebraska student loan debt is around $32,000. At a time when college tuition is skyrocketing, why isn't this progress? Congressman Bacon, you have a minute 30.
Well, first of all, I disagree with the president doing this by executive order. The House controls the purse. This is where we've had an executive branch that is too big, when it can just do what the checks and balances are gone. Now, there are things I think we can do for students. I believe that we could help students redo their loans at a lower interest rate, as an example, so they can renegotiate. We're looking at legislation now that the universities have to go to each student that comes in and says, okay, this is what's going to cost you for 4 years. This is what you're likely going to get with the degree that you're getting. We want to have more transparency. We also want to show students, okay, what's the graduation rate for these universities? So these are some of the things that we are working. But we also got to teach responsibility. I had a choice of colleges to go to. I went to a 2-year school because I thought I could afford it, a community college, and I went into the 4-year school with state tuition help that I thought would be most affordable. And in the meantime, I had to work as a dishwasher through the entire 4 years, at the university. I had to work 2 jobs during the summer. We have to teach people accountability and responsibility as well. But I think we should have more transparency with our schools, and we should help folks get at least a lower interest rate. But we just can't let the president arbitrarily do this without the say of the House.
Senator Vargas, 90 seconds.
Thank you. Look, I'm a former public school science teacher, and I watched on the front lines what it looks like to invest in our education system. It's one of the reasons why in the legislature I focused on fully funding our education system. It's also why I believe that our higher education system needs to work better. But this is an example where I disagree with past administrations and the current administration. I don't believe that providing the student loan forgiveness in the way that it happened was the most economical, was the most pragmatic, and unfortunately, it just made it harder for working class individuals like my own dad and my mother who did not attend college, that don't get the same kind of relief. I want to make the middle class work better, but it's not going to happen if we spend beyond our means and we don't target those means. I do think it's possible for us to be able to reform systems, like we can reform the federal Pell Grant system so it can better help for community college, for people to be able to better afford higher education. But it also starts with getting members of Congress, and unfortunately for my colleague here, he has a 28% lifetime record with the National Education Association. And it matters when we invest in education, we control within our means, and we also do so in a bipartisan way, and that's what I plan to do in Congress.
Congressman Bacon, 30 seconds.
Well, since he brought up the NSEA, we did have a vouchers vote, right? It's what's the biggest bill on education. How did Tony vote? He voted present, not voting. One of the 20% of the time, he will not vote yes or no. That was a significant vote, right? Now, one of the things I believe we can do better is also offer more trades, whether at the high school or junior high or post-high school. and Johnny Rogers is here today, and I appreciate his support. That's one of his main things that he's been focusing on, is getting more of our youth into the trades programs, welding, carpentry work. It is the best way to help folks get out of poverty, and it should be a better option, or a considered option.
Senator Vargas, 30 seconds.
It's okay when we agree on things. I think the trades is really important for us to invest in. It's also the reason why I've been trying to focus on making it easier for people within the middle class to be able to get a pathway to working and get a job, just like my dad. My dad was a member of IBEW. That's why I'm really proud to have IBEW here with me today. It's also the reason why I'm proud to have the endorsement of the AFL-CIO and so many members of organized labor across the state. But unfortunately, it still matters when we have a record against supporting education, especially when it comes to making sure it's fully funded.
All right, we'll move on. Next question. When voters are deciding who to pick between you two, there are countless ballot initiatives, issues that garnered tens of thousands of signatures just to get to this point. You'll be on the ballot with these ballot measures. Nebraska law regarding abortion is illegal after the 12th week. There are 2 petitions that voters will be voting on regarding abortion. In the most basic sense, one is about abortion rights, the other restrictions. How would you vote and why on your ballot? Senator Vargas, you have 90 seconds.
One, I think democracy is incredibly important. I think the history of Nebraska being able to have these ballot initiatives is our opportunity to make sure our voices are heard. It also means that when we get it wrong in terms of the legislature or the legislative capacity, that the voters get the opportunity to weigh in. This is another example of that. I'll be supporting the measure that actually listens to women and protects their freedoms, and not the one that further is trying to restrict them and tell them what they can and cannot do. And I think my record in the legislature of actually voting on behalf of women's freedoms is important. But I also think it matters when we have members of Congress, and it does frustrate me when individuals are the original co-sponsor of a full abortion ban in the Constitution. That's what Congressman Bacon did. He didn't just do it once. He didn't just do it twice. He co-sponsored it 3 different times. And in co-sponsoring it, there are no exceptions for the life of the mother or for rape or incest for this legislation. There's no carve-outs for IVF for individuals across Nebraska looking to make sure that they can start their own family. And I think it matters when his record of voting against women and their health care decisions is ultimately what we are going to be deciding here on this ballot on November. And so I've been proud to stand on behalf of women, because I don't think politicians should be telling women what they can and cannot do with their bodies.
Congressman Bacon. All right, let's keep that down. That's why some places don't have live debates. Congressman Bacon, you have 1:30.
You know, as with most Christians, I believe that God's created us. We're created in God's image. We have a soul, and God's called us to protect the most innocent and unprotected amongst us. I'm going to support the Nebraska law. It has reasonable restrictions, and it has exceptions for rape and incest, health of the mother, and it goes against what Tony just said. I'm going to support the law with these exceptions, and he knows better. That the bill he's talking about, by the way, never mentions abortion, never mentions IVF. It is just, it's demagoguery. The top issues in this country right now are the economy, border, and crime. They need to grasp something that can get himself ahead of that, because he's losing on those other 3 issues. I'm going to support the Nebraska law, reasonable restrictions, reasonable exceptions. Now, his view, he's been asked for years, what restrictions would he like? There's only 7 countries in the world out of 200 that have abortion on demand until birth. That's where this man stands. It's the inhumanity of it, of an 8 or 9 month unborn child that is viable with a healthy mom. But that's where he stands. He's on the extreme end of this. Most Nebraskans don't want 0, but they don't want where Tony's at, where there's no restrictions at all. Most of Europe is where Nebraska is at right now, 3 and 4 months. We're going with the Western world on this, not the extremes where 7 other countries are at.
Senator Vargas.
I don't support abortion on demand, and I've said that many times in the past. I think what does matter is when I look at my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter, and when Roe v. Wade fell, it was the first time that my daughter had less rights than my wife. This is the reason why I support not only women's reproductive freedom and rights, but I will stand up against Don Bacon and his co-sponsorship of full abortion bans that will take away those rights.
There's been
Congressman.
no, life of conception, there was no mention of abortion or IVF. But he's been asked, would you support a restriction at 9 months? He says, no. 8 months, no. For a healthy mom and a healthy baby. He has for years been asked, what restrictions will you support? And it's always none.
Next question is on immigration. Data from 2 years ago puts nearly 1 of every 10 Nebraska workers are immigrants. So when former President Trump talks about, in part, fixing the border crisis, mass deportation, explaining that it would be part of his plan, how would it work and how would it impact other deportation safeguards? Congressman Bacon, a minute and a half.
I personally don't believe it will work. What we should be looking at is who is here, has been convicted of murder, convicted of sexual assaults. We know the numbers around 25, 26,000. We should focus on those who are not welcome in our country because of their criminal past. That's where I think we should start. Now, I did vote in the House, and we passed it out of the House, the most restrictive border security bill ever. It had border security, it had more judges, it had more processing capabilities. It also had Remain in Mexico. Now, I believe that our country should have expanded legal immigration, but what we've seen in the last 4 years, 10 million folks coming here illegally, 8 million from the southern border, with the drug fentanyl problem, where we're losing 100,000 people a year. Now, the vast majority coming here, they want to work, they want to be a part of our society, but there is a criminal element that's there and a terrorist element. And we've seen innocent people get murdered in our country because of this policy. So we need to have a policy that does Remain in Mexico, get screened for whether you should come here on a humanitarian or asylum status. And if you get approved, come here, you get a job permit, and we can get you a job. But we need to have a better asylum process and a legal immigration process, but we can't have this unfettered border that we've had for the last 4 years.
Senator Vargas, a minute 30.
I'm the product of working class immigrants. It's an important part of my story. It's also the reason why I'm proud to be a former public school science teacher. It's also the reason why, when I'm listening constituents right now and it comes to border security, I have been listening. And this is a priority for me. It's a priority also because I see what's happening in Congress. This is the most ineffective Congress that we've seen in any of our generations. It's not my opinion, that's a fact. And not only is this Congress right now unable to get things done, but when there is the strongest bipartisan legislation in the U.S. Senate, led by a Republican, that could have actually addressed border security, supported by law enforcement, supported by Border Security Association. It took Donald Trump telling individuals like Don Bacon, do not vote on this, don't bring it forward, because it'll hurt his chances politically. What I care about in my lifetime in the legislature is trying to actually come across the aisle on working on issues that are going to solve problems. But we cannot afford to have a Congress that is only going to hold on to power. And when Don Bacon did not tell his Speaker of the House, we need to vote on this bill, he told me that he cares more about the Speaker and Trump than he does care about Nebraskans.
Congressman Bacon, 30 seconds.
We're going to have to do Government 101 here with Mr. Vargas, because it didn't pass the Senate. If it doesn't pass the Senate, it's not going to come to the House. Now, under this president, we had 10,000 people a day coming here illegally. The legislation that Senator Langford, and he's a friend of mine, I respect him, it was going to take it to 5,000. Now, if it could have made it through the Senate with amendments and improved, I would have likely voted for it because it would have been a bipartisan bill. It would have been better. But it couldn't even get out of the Senate because it was 5,000 a day. And I must also point out, he keeps saying it's from the working class. He doesn't vote 20% of the time. If any of us in here didn't work 20% of the time, we'd get fired. We would not get promoted.
Senator Vargas, 30 seconds.
I bring up that Senate vote, or the Senate bill in particular, because it matters that he had the opportunity to bring a bill just like that, that would have had bipartisan support in the House. But when Trump tells him to do something, he has been stepping up and saying, sure, we won't vote on that issue. We won't work and bring that kind of solutions to Nebraska. And it matters also my record in the legislature. 65 bills passed, a member of our budget committee, balancing budgets, and $6 billion worth of tax relief that I voted for that passed on behalf of Nebraskans.
Next question. This week, Omaha's police chief talked about a disturbing trend. Officers are recovering guns like never before. It's also putting law enforcement, in his view, in a precarious position, understanding that the more guns a cop crosses, the more chances for a tragedy. According to Pew Research, 6 of every 10 Americans favor stricter gun laws, and that it's too easy to get a gun in America. Why can't this be fixed? Mr. Vargas, what would you do about the prevalence of guns?
You know, I'm very proud of our 2 born and raised Nebraska kids. I think about them every single day. And when I think about the state of affairs in our country when it comes to gun safety and gun violence, it's personal for me and my wife. I want to make sure that our communities are safer. It's the reason why I support common sense gun safety legislation. And the majority of Nebraskans and Americans also support common sense gun safety legislation. But unfortunately, it's the members of Congress that have been elected that have voted against bipartisan solutions. Congressman Bacon voted against a bipartisan bill that 29 members of his own party came across the aisle to actually vote for and support. He had voted against the mental health funding that was part of it. When you vote against something that's bipartisan that would have made our community safer, that was also supported by law enforcement, you are voting against the public safety of our communities. It's one of the reasons why I want to work on bipartisan legislation that's going to advance this issue. I want to continue to fund our law enforcement like I did $37 million in the legislature. And while I continue to focus on public safety on behalf of Nebraskans, on behalf of my wife and my kids and all families across this district.
Congressman Bacon, a minute and a half.
There are a lot of platitudes there, a lot of buzzwords, no meat, right? That's the facts. The best way to do gun control is to keep violent people behind bars. Don't let them out early. Like he's had early parole for all criminals. He's pushing that. He's been trying to take away mandatory minimums. He's been putting his legislation as one amendment. The one major thing he's done in 8 years is made it harder to hold juveniles that are violent. So we have the best thing we could do is violent people. You serve your time. You don't get out early. You don't do cashless bail, and I also believe that we have a straw purchase problem. People are buying guns and giving them to folks who are not supposed to have them. They're not being prosecuted. We got to do better there. Let me go back. His one major accomplishment was he made it hard to let to hold dangerous juvenile delinquents. We've had a 1,700% increase in juvenile violent crime. Because of his bill, folks have even been arrested 5 times, juveniles have been released. They say Tony Vargas's amendment is tying their hands behind their back. We recently had 2 people murdered by juveniles who were arrested 5 times. And our leadership right here at this table say it's Tony Vargas's amendment. Tony, your amendment is costing people's lives. And that's why 100% of the OPOA, the policemen, 100% endorse me, not a single one for you, because they know what you're about.
One, I can tell you're frustrated, Congressman Bacon. I think what matters is that I have voted for $37 million of law enforcement. You did not respond to not voting for a bipartisan piece of legislation that law enforcement across this country supported to make our community safer, to make my own family and my kids and every single child across Nebraska safer in their communities. And not voting against the bipartisan solution tells me that when you talk about being bipartisan and you vote against these things that make our communities safer, that you're actually voting against Nebraskans.
Tony, 100% of the sheriffs in our district support me. 100% of the county attorneys support me. 100% of the Omaha police voted for me. Not a single one for him. Why? Well, he was out protesting them in the summer of 2020. We had a dastardly murder in Minneapolis. Why didn't he go to Minneapolis and protest there? No, he protested our police, our neighbors, our sons and daughters, our aunts and uncles. I stand with our police, Tony. You did not. We had more police injured in the summer of 2020 than on January 6th in Washington, D.C. You didn't stand with the cops.
The question was, what would you do about the prevalence of guns?
Hold dangerous people behind bars.
We already answered that.
And Mr. Vargas, what would you do about the guns?
I think there's common sense gun safety legislation that would not only enhance background checks, that would actually make sure that we are in supporting the kind of training that is needed. But it matters when you vote against bills in the legislature, or actually bills in Congress here for Congressman Bacon, that would have made our communities safer and addressed gun safety legislation. And he has not been responding to his vote against a bipartisan piece of gun safety legislation.
Mr. Bacon, last word.
Look at the red flag law. Let's talk about that. If you have good due process in the front, when you're taking somebody's gun, and strong due process on the backside to return it, then it's good. But most of the red flag laws do not have that. I'll give you an example. In the VA, they did a red flag law. People are coming in to get financial counseling, and the VA put them on the red flag list for VA counseling. The ACLU said it was wrong. If you put people like Tony in charge of the red flag laws, you will lose your Second Amendment rights. So these red flag laws better be very well studied and very constitutional with strong due process, and that bill didn't have it.
All right, we'll move on here. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court subjected itself to a code of ethics. Many argue there are plenty of loopholes and that it's still there's much more regulations for other judges. In fact, a member of Congress has to follow all sorts of ethics rules with accountability. Why is this so hard for the U.S. Supreme Court to do, and can they be trusted to judge themselves? Congressman Bacon, a minute and a half.
Well, the Supreme Court should come up with their own ethics rules. We have three branches of government. They're independent. It's probably not constitutional for Congress to say, hey, this is what you got to do, Supreme Court. But they should have stronger rules. I have to report every year. I have tons of open and transparent things I have to file, and glad to do it. But the Supreme Court is under attack in some ways because you have a 7 or 6-3 split in the Supreme Court. So right now they're been a pretty good target from the left on these things. But if I was on the Supreme Court, I would be a leader and say, let's tighten our ship up. We can't be taking paid vacations from other people and things like that. So they've opened themselves up to some criticism of that. But when you talk about ethics violations, Tony took $60,000 from a dark money group run by Mark Elias. It was in the Washington Examiner, and it was to help pay for his housing, his food, his utilities. That's what they said. When you look at that specific, that looks like an illegal contribution. $60,000 he put in his pocket, not in his campaign. He could spend on his personal expenses. The FEC is investigating this because it looks like an illegal contribution. So, talking about ethics violations, he's under the scope right now.
Senator Vargas, a minute and a half.
One, I think you're highlighting one of the reasons why we need renewed civility in this country. Because one, I think it matters what our record is. I also think it matters that when there are investigations, like recently for Congressman Bacon, there have been ethics violations that have been brought from ProPublica identifying issues. But the real answer to this question is Congress has a responsibility to make sure we uphold the laws which also apply to other branches of government. We need to make sure that there is no impropriety within our Supreme Court. It is an independent branch, but it's our responsibility to also not allow this kind of misdealings. It's also why it's really important that when we're talking about Congressman Bacon, this actual instance was brought by an investigative journalism that claimed and sought research and investigations that he did a political favor for Donald Trump's media company and actually cut the line for immigration and did it knowingly and told his staff to do so. I think it matters when we have these kind of power plays that do political favors, and we cannot have that kind of system in DC, and we should be holding individuals accountable to it.
Congressman Bacon.
I would request our local media to pry into how he took $60,000, put it in his pocket from a dark money group to pay his expenses. The FEC's investigating it. Why isn't our local reporters digging into this? And on what he's saying with the ProPublica, if I can even pronounce it, I do 700 visas and passport help for constituents every year, 700. I treat them all the same. I don't care if you're Tony Vargas. I don't care if you're Mayor Stothert. I don't care who you are. I'm going to treat all 700 requests the exact same way. And I did it for this gentleman who was a constituent, does work for Trump. I treated him no different. But he's saying he would politicize his constituent services if he didn't like them or on the other side of the aisle.
Senator Vargas, 30 seconds.
I think what you heard from Congressman Bacon is he says he would do it for everybody. But an interview with a former member of his team said he was told to do so by Don Bacon, even against their own ethical misgivings. It matters that we hold elected officials accountable to the kind of character that we need in Congress right now at this moment to be above board.
Next question is, both of you know major events in the weather world have just hammered Nebraska this year, from a tornado to a hurricane-force winds. Recently, a good chunk of the nation has been battered by Hurricane Helene, places no one thought could be impacted by a hurricane. Wildfires burning longer, wider, extreme heat getting hotter, longer droughts. A UN report says fossil fuels are by far the biggest contributor to global climate change. Mr. Vargas, are we moving away from fossil fuels fast enough?
No, we're not. But we also need to make sure that we are providing a balanced approach to how we address our renewable energy and energy for this country. I'm a former public school science teacher. I care about whether or not we are educating not only our communities and our schools, but whether or not we're leaving our earth and our land and our water in a better place than we found it. Climate change is real. We need to address it. But it starts with investing in a clean energy economy of jobs that are actually going to reduce our impact and our carbon footprint. And also making sure we have a diverse set of energy sources. We cannot just go in one direction, but we have to make sure that we're doing so. But I also think it matters when we're not investing in these kind of jobs. Congressman Bacon had an opportunity to invest in a lot of American-made jobs with the CHIPS Act. This is an opportunity to raise wages for Nebraskans and Americans that would have made it possible for people to actually be in the middle class and to be able to afford to live. And voting against these bills is just voting against Nebraskans that have an opportunity to have a piece of the American dream for themselves. And this is one of the reasons why I'm running, because I believe we need these kind of jobs, and I want to make sure we're investing in them, so not only taking care of our country and our land and our climate, but also the middle class.
Mr. Bacon, a minute and a half.
First, I brought in $5 billion in infrastructure spending. I've brought in thousands of jobs to this district, and I've saved thousands of jobs in this district with the infrastructure money that we brought in. And he talks about the CHIPS Act. That was $275 billion for one industry, going to some of the most wealthiest companies. I struggled with it. Initially, it was $50 billion. I thought, okay, $50 billion will do if that helps bring back computer companies here, chip making. Then it was $75 billion. Then it became $270+ billion. I thought it was outrageous. I'm a supporter of all the above energy. It was the work that I did in 2017 that got solar energy and wind energy tax credits put back into the tax law. I heard from our constituents. I went to the Ways and Means chairman, and we got them put back in. Then we worked later on geothermal as well. We have to realize, though, that natural gas is going to be the wave of the future for a while. It burns cleaner than coal, and we have the world's largest supplies. We should not only be energy independent here, we should be supplying Europe and many other countries so we can get them off Russian energy, Iranian energy, and so forth. I think nuclear is the future. France has 95% nuclear. They import zero from Russia, right? Nuclear is the way that we can have totally clean energy, and it's safer. The new technology is incredible. I was also the author of the Growing Climate Solutions Act that helped get farmers and ranchers and help incentivize them through money incentives to expand on their sustainable farming techniques. And that was my bill, working with Abigail Spanberger from Virginia.
Senator Vargas, 30 seconds.
The bill that he just talked about, the CHIPS Act, he just said he voted against hundreds of thousands of Nebraska and American jobs, opportunities for the middle class to actually grow. I want to make sure that we're creating the kind of jobs that make it easier for people to save, because I know where I came from. And I also know that times are tough when we're not actually creating the kind of jobs in our own country. And those jobs would have also made us more competitive across the globe. We want to be more competitive against China. So when you talk about this type of not only sector, this sector is a game changer for the kind of opportunities, the kind of wages, the kind of benefits that would have made it easier for the working and middle class. That's the reason why it is clear to me when he votes against bills that actually make the working class easier, that we need to hold him accountable to it.
Mr. Bacon?
When he says the hundreds of thousands of jobs, it's laughable. It's not true. But let me just, he said he's for $3 trillion in supplemental spending, gave us the worst inflation in 40 years. Now we're looking at a $270 billion bill for one industry. for some of the wealthiest companies. I just don't think it was right. It's too much to do. We're spending too much as it is. But I'll come back to my original thought. I've done $5 billion in infrastructure in this district in the last 8 years. No one has done that before. New airport, bridges, natural gas pipelines. I could go on and on. Sewer infrastructure in Sarpy County, there's Sheriff Davis, right? We have brought thousands of jobs here, and we've protected thousands of jobs, like at the Offutt Air Force Base.
As a quick follow-up, I know voters a lot of times like to know on a most macro kind of a scale. Senator Vargas, do you drive a hybrid or electric vehicle?
No, I do not. No, I drive a Jeep.
Mr. Bacon?
I drive a 10-year-old Chevy Impala.
Car dealers now are calling both.
I know.
Next question. This is a little more serious. We've had Ukraine and Russia at war, Israel at war with Hamas and Hezbollah. Mr. Bacon, should the United States continue to be the world's police force if it's not in manpower, it's the checkbook?
We are the world superpower for freedom. Nobody could stand in our spot to share the values of freedom and free markets, rule of law, than we. If we hide behind our borders, there will be a big void, and Russia, China, Iran will fill it. Now, I don't want our force. I've learned as a 5-time commander. I've deployed 4 times in the Middle East. So I combat two different times, more close up and personal. I don't want our men and women in combat if we can help it. But in this case, we have an opportunity to help Ukraine win with weapons. Russia is doing this invasion. It's a barbaric invasion, and if we don't help out, they will fall. And then you're going to see other countries around that periphery fall as well. We got to stand up to a bully. China is looking at how we handle this, right? And they're looking at Taiwan. We got to support our ally Israel. They were attacked on October 7th, 1,200 people murdered. We just had 181 ballistic missiles fired from Iran. If we don't stand with Israel, they will fall. And I believe it's our moral and spiritual calling to help Israel survive as a Jewish state, a safe haven for Jews all over the world with 2,000 years of persecution. So I don't believe in having our forces there, but we got to support our allies, and we got to support the values that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, they're starting to form this unholy alliance, but they don't support our values. If we're not there, our world will be a more dangerous place, and they'll be at our border.
Senator Vargas, a minute and a half.
It's okay when we agree on issues of national security, and I believe we do. I think we need to make sure that we are not only responsive to Russia and making sure that we're supporting Ukraine, but that we're also supporting Israel. We have a responsibility to not only be a support to our allies across this entire globe, but I think we have a mandate to. It is the way that we not only have a responsibility to be a good neighbor, but it's actually the definition of what it means to be an ally. Both in good times and bad, that we step up and we say that we stand with you and we're going to support you with the reinforcements of both aid and military and support that is needed. Because it's our responsibility to also make sure that we're protecting the kind of democracy across this globe. But I also believe that we have an understanding to make sure that we counteract this at every single level of government. And I do see that there is a dissonance even within, right now, President Trump and J.D. Vance on how they're going to approach supporting both Israel and Ukraine. And I 100% will make sure to fight to make sure they're getting the support that they need, because it is within not only our interests, but it's what it means to be a strong ally.
Congressman Bacon, 30 seconds.
I do want to recognize Bruce Friedlander here. He's from the Jewish Federation, a great friend of mine. And I appreciate Tony standing up here saying he's against anti-Semitism and supporting Israel. I just wish he was more public about it all the time. He's very rarely open about it. And we need more people to stand up and say what's going on in our college campuses and all over our country is wrong. I want to stand by our Jewish American friends. What's going on is scary, and we got to be clear that anti-Semitism is repugnant to the values of being an American.
Senator Vargas.
Congressman Bacon, I think that we should be telling truths. I co-sponsored resolution right on the eve of October 7th to make sure that we were not only condemning Hamas, but we are unequivocally supporting Israel and calling out anti-Semitism, and also doing so when we have legislation that is brought forward and standing by our community. It's the reason why I continue to stand by not only Israel, but also Ukraine, because we need to stand by our allies when they have their backs against the wall.
This summer, the Supreme Court overturned the Chevron doctrine. That means like an agency could reasonably interpret a statute if Congress didn't specifically spell it out. In your view, will this slow down agencies doing business because they need lawmakers or the courts to interpret some details? Or will it prevent rogue actors from implementing their own ideas? Senator Vargas?
I think it's our responsibility to be reactive to these kind of issues. Companies that are playing a bigger role in policy, they need to be partners in this. But I also want to make sure that we are thinking about the taxpayer and their costs and how this is trickling down to how they're feeling. It's one of the reasons why I believe that when we're looking at what the middle class are going through and rising costs, I want to make sure we're addressing the kind of price gouging that we have been seeing over these last several years. While companies are doing a lot better, which I support, they should be doing everything they can to lower the costs within reason. But it also matters when we have a congressman, and it frustrates the taxpayer that has voted against price gouging measures that actually lower the costs for Nebraskans and actually vote to increase taxes for the middle class. And then when it gets an opportunity, sides with the people that donate to their campaigns and the PACs rather than siding with you. And so this is the reason why I am fighting to make sure that we are trying to control the costs. We can work with the companies, but we ultimately do need to address this kind of price gouging that actually is happening in our communities on behalf of the American people and Nebraskans.
Congressman Bacon, 90 seconds.
It's just total baloney about a mill tax increase. Silly stuff there, Tony. Also, I appreciate you spoke up in October about anti-Semitism in Israel, but where were you at in November, December, January, February, March, all the way through now? Saying it once or twice in this environment is not adequate. Now, Chevron, it was a good Supreme Court decision. We had bureaucrats legislating. The Congress is supposed to legislate and put out what is supposed to be done, and then the executive branch is supposed to execute that law. What we've seen really since Woodrow Wilson was that we gave too much power to the bureaucracy to interpret, and then 4 years later reinterpret with a new president. And what we had is all this massive policy fluctuations with the same law. Congress legislates, bureaucrats, the executive branch executes the law. And we got so out of whack with that. And what it did for the businesses or the consumers, they would get rules this way and they would start doing it. And 4 years later with a new administration, they would get different rules. And then it would cost them tons of money. So to respond to those new rule changes. So Chevron was a good case because it's going to provide some predictability to our free market system, our consumers. And if we've got to change the policy, Congress should change the policy. Unfortunately, a lot of congressmen like this because they didn't have to legislate. They can just let it go and blame the bureaucrat. No, we legislate and we got to take the tough votes. Tony wouldn't know about that. 20% does not vote. He votes present, not voting, 20% of the time.
Senator Vargas, 30 seconds.
I hope we noticed that he did not respond to voting against lowering in the price gouging that is actually happening by companies that we're actually talking about right now. And it also matters that when you're talking about Congress legislating and standing up for the American people, Project 2025 is a very real document that is very clearly, not only are the authors have a plan in place as soon as they'd see a Republican majority that wins, and that's their plan. The same authors are donors of Congressman Bacon. The same PACs and special interests that have been supporting Congressman Bacon know that he is more likely to listen to them than listen to Nebraskans. And I think that when we see the amount of special interest money and donations that have been coming through, it is very clear that he has a responsibility to be accountable to that.
Hey, Brian, do I get an extra minute?
Bacon. I'm sorry?
Do I get an extra minute? Yeah, he's going way over the time. You may not see it.
I don't always see that, so.
So let's talk about 2025. I haven't read it. I don't plan on reading it. I don't know anybody that's read 2025. It's a Democrat bogey, man, because the issues are not on their side. It's the economy. It's the borders. It's crime. And so this 2025, Heritage Foundation did it. I don't know a single person in my circle that's read it. I'm about Project Nebraska 02. And that's how I bring in $5 billion in infrastructure spending, and I protect the jobs, and I increase the jobs in this district. Project NE02, it's better.
If someone moved to Omaha last week and turned on the TV, he or she would not be out of line to think voters will elect one of you, and you two are the worst people in the world, based on the commercials. Mr. Bacon, earlier this week you explained your campaign has stayed positive, but that it's the outside money, the spending on negative ads, of which you have no control. Are you okay with that? If not, what are you doing to fix this system, and do you want others to speak for you?
Well, this is my 5th cycle, and you're right, it's frustrating when you see your record distorted when people know otherwise. I mean, every survey I've ever filled out, in the squares or in the back in hand notes, I've always said protect the life of the mother. But, so it is of my view, I don't mind hard ads if they're truthful, and if there's a real problem. My goal is not to attack Tony on things that I think are bogus. I think there's a lot of things they're not bogus. I got a good area I could talk about. But I don't believe in the false ads that are just made up out of thin blue, or one extraneous comment and twist it into things. But your question is more about the outside spending. The courts have looked at it and they say it's freedom of speech. To restrict it, you're restricting other people's freedom of speech. And I grapple with that because I don't like lies. I don't like distortions. But in the end, if you're a farmer and you're banding together with other farmers, it's your right to spend money and support a candidate that you like, or to oppose a candidate you don't like. Or if you're the labor unions, you mentioned labor unions, by the way, I got support of 65% of the local labor here in Omaha. So the folks who know me are with me, and I'm looking at one right there nodding his head yes, right there. But if we curtail people's ability to spend on these ads, you're curtailing their freedom of speech, and I grapple with that.
Senator Vargas, minute 30.
One, I think all the dark money that's coming in on either side, we need to get money out of politics. The money that actually matters is taxpayers' money when they are saying, I want to support a candidate from themselves. It's one of the reasons why End Citizens United is an opportunity for us to actually right the ship. And if we can't work on something where we can agree that this kind of money shouldn't have this kind of influence on politics, then we're going to continue to have these kind of negative ads. But I also do think it matters that when these ads are using the record that we currently have, and I know that Congressman Bacon brought it up, that he has said that he has an exception for the life of the mother. But the question I have is then why did you co-sponsor a full abortion ban in the Constitution 3 different times with no exceptions for the life of mother or rape or incest, no carve out for IVF, and no protections for contraception? Why co-sponsor it 3 different times if you didn't believe in the cause of that legislation? I think that these ads need to be called out, and we will be doing that. I know both sides are going to do that. And what I really think matters is when we hold each other accountable to our voting records.
Congressman Bacon, 30 seconds.
It's a little bit laughable. He says he doesn't like dark money, but he took $60,000 from a dark money group and put it in his pocket to help pay bills, right? And it's under FEC investigation. So it's speaking with a forked tongue on this. And when it comes to the bill he talks about, it never mentions the word abortion once, not once. It doesn't mention IVF. It doesn't even, the intent was never even to ban abortion. It was a matter of principle as a Christian that unborn children deserve protections, that they're human. That was the intent. The author of this bill never intended to ban abortions. It was a matter of principle that we believe in.
Mr. Vargas?
One, to the allegations he has been spreading, there's no impropriety, and this investigation that he's talking about is simply Republicans and the dark money that are trying to make something out of nothing. What I think does matter is when we have a record of looking at the people that are donating to Congressman Bacon. When the authors of Project 2025 are donating to Congressman Bacon, and he can say that he doesn't read it or he doesn't plan on reading it, but they plan on making sure that he is enacting his plan, I think that matters to the public, and we should make sure we hold them accountable to it.
This next question talks about foreign land ownership in Nebraska. foreign countries own nearly 2% of agricultural land. Legislature has been studying this. Mr. Vargas, is this a threat or is it the free market at work?
Well, one, we need to make sure that we are addressing housing prices and the availability of different options for land and housing. I think that it's an opportunity for us to make sure that we are being reactive, well, actually responsive to the needs of Nebraskans. It's why I've worked on a lot of different housing issues in the state of Nebraska. We've passed record amounts of dollars that are investing in creation of housing so that we can lower the average market price in our communities. Republicans led and worked with me on this legislation because they know that there's a bipartisan solution to this problem. But it also matters that we reduce regulations that address this. It also matters that we are working across the aisle with the industry themselves that support these efforts. Really proud that home builders, the realtors, and the other members that are working in this sector have supported my legislation because they know it's going to make the American dream more possible for Nebraskans. It's going to make it more possible for people like my wife and our family, and for my mother and father, and every single person that is trying to figure out how to afford their first home and trying to figure out how to make ends meet on their mortgage and the rent.
Mr. Bacon, minute 30.
Well, I'm glad he admitted that he took the $60,000 and spent it on his personal expenses, right? And he's talking about the money. I've never put a dollar in my pocket from anybody. I have my retirement and I have my income, and I don't pocket any money. He admits he just did. Now, you talk about foreign land being bought. I have a bill that's passed out of committee that will tell CFIUS that they have to give us a full accounting of how much foreign land is being purchased by primarily China. We have indications that China's buying land by our bases, farmland, whether it's in South Dakota, Wyoming, maybe even Nebraska. And we want to have an accounting of how bad is this problem, right? And so right now there's a lot of guesswork here. So we got it out of committee. It's going to pass out of the House. I believe I'll have good support in the Senate. And it will be, I believe, one of the 11 or 12 bills I end up getting done in this Congress by the time we're done. If we get the Farm Bill out, it's in the Farm Bill right now. But it's important to know just how much is China buying and where they're buying it. And it's not the only actor, but that's an important one. When we talk about affordable housing, I'm on multiple bills to try to get affordable housing out there. Right now, I'm trying to incentivize the use of manufactured homes. They're a third of the cost of normally built homes, and we can incentivize more building and open this up as an opportunity. I've also tried to incentivize our police with some of our law enforcement right here today, and also firefighters to give them half price on homes, on HUD homes, so we can incentivize them to go out and be in the areas where they're needed. But I'm on 4 different housing bills because I know it's a problem.
Mr. Vargas, 30 seconds.
I think we need to make sure that we are stating the facts. And Congressman Bacon, continuing to say lies with investigations that are concocted by special interests across this country is not only wrong, but I expect better from somebody that breathes and talks about civility. I think what does matter is that I've worked to try to make sure that housing is more affordable across this country, across the state in particular, by lowering the cost for Nebraskans, by investing and incentivizing the kind of housing opportunities that will make it possible for the American dream. It's my record, and it's something I'm going to keep working on in Congress.
Mr. Bacon, 30 seconds.
So the policies my opponent supports created inflation. He supported those policies. That inflation then created high interest rates. Those are really some of the biggest issues right now. The Republicans have come in, and I wish we did better, but I have right now 10 bills passed out of the House. I'm going to get my stuff done. I'm working hard. But we've stopped the crazy spending. Inflation is back down to normal. Interest rates are coming down. That is the most important things we can do right now. I'm on other bills too that will help, but lowering interest rates is the most key thing we can do for the housing market right now.
All right, we're getting close to wrapping up here, where you'll have 2 minutes each for your closing argument. So this is the last question. You'll have 30 seconds and no rebuttal, just so we can hit the timing. Winner take all now is off the table for the election. That means the district, the most purple of all in the state, could make a big difference in the race for the White House. Mr. Bacon, are you of the mindset of many political scientists who say that if winner take all was in effect, none of the major candidates would come to Omaha and Omaha would lose its relevance?
It would have an influence. I'm of the view that every state should do what we do. If all 50 states did by district, you would have the nominees going everywhere and visiting more places. The problem is, if you're only one of 2 states that do it, it creates huge distortions down ballot. We have $21 million being spent nationally on one side and 0 on the other, and it's just a reality. I wish all 50 states did what we did. It would be a fairer process by all.
Mr. Vargas, 30 seconds.
You know, I've been proud to represent this community for the last 11 years, 10 years in office. Also proud that in the legislature, we've worked on bipartisan solutions. Past legislatures for decades have maintained this independence because they believe in the voices of Nebraska's 2nd District. Now, you have to fight for it. You have to earn the votes of this district. It's also the reason why Trump won it in 2016 and then Biden won it in 2020. But unfortunately, for Congressman Bacon, signing on to a letter, taking away this electoral vote process because Trump told him to, and then was graciously rewarded with an endorsement from Trump, tells me he cares more about Trump than he does about our electoral independence.
All right, closing arguments now. Coin flip determined the order. Congressman Bacon, you have 2 minutes.
Forbes has rated us the #1 place to live in the country. We have the highest rate of growth of anywhere in the United States. I'm so proud to be here, and I'm proud to have been a part of it. And what do? Well, as I already mentioned, we're bringing in $5 billion in investments here, which is jobs, increasing our business growth, more employment, higher wages. So I'm proud of my record on that. And I had to do it through hard work. The Center of Lawmaking Effectiveness rated me the #1 Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives for getting things done. Also, Gov.Track, by the way, these are all neutral, independent groups, right? Gov.Track says I'm the #1 Republican for getting bills passed into law. #2 overall, out of 435. And then U.S. Common Ground Committee looks at 6 different factors, and they rate people on their bipartisanship. There's 4 people out of all the House, all the Senate, and all the governors, out of 585 people, 4 got a perfect score. I was 1. I get things done. And it's embodied today. I have Ann Ashford here today, who ran for this seat, a Democrat. I appreciate your support, ma'am. So what does this mean for us? Well, we got $1.4 billion for OFFA to rebuild it, 10,000 jobs there, a lot of jobs to rebuild that base. We rebuilt Camp Ashland after the floods, $48 million. Epley, we're going to have the first modernization in 40 years. I got $70 million to do that. We're going to have an international airport that goes direct to the Caribbean in Cancun. I got 2 new bridges. I have a natural gas infrastructure. I have sewer infrastructure going in, and much more. But more importantly, what does it mean for our country? I have been the most effective advocate for our nation's national security and defense than anyone. The Center of Effective Lawmaking rates me #1 when it comes to our defense. I've served as a chairman where we got 31 changes made to the quality of our airmen, our servicemen, 2 million of them, and now I'm the chairman of the Cyber Warfare Subcommittee, and I'm going to give it all I got to defend our country from Russia, China, Iran. I ask for your vote. It's been a privilege to serve you.
Senator Vargas, 2 minutes.
First, I want to thank you for moderating. I want to thank the League of Women Voters. I want to thank my mother and my wife and my friends and my family here with me. I also want to thank Congressman Bacon. I appreciate you participating in democracy. It matters. Look, I love this community. I've raised my 2 born and raised Nebraska kids here. This is home for us. My parents taught me the ideas of working class values because you cannot forget where you came from. You cannot forget who you serve. And this is the reason why I became a public school science teacher, a school board member, and a state senator these last 8 years. I love this community. It's the reason why I went across the aisle and voted to actually provide tax relief in $6 billion worth and was named a taxpayer defender. It's also the reason why I fought for our law enforcement funding, our training center, their pensions and their pay. It's the reason why I'm incredibly proud to receive the endorsement of organized labor through the AFL-CIO. It's also the reason why it matters to me that I'm going to fight to lower your cost of living because times are tough. But I also think it matters that when there's an opportunity to stand up for bipartisan solutions, and you've heard many of them brought up today, Congressman Bacon had an opportunity and voted against them. When you only listen to whatever the party bosses tell you, or what Donald Trump tells you, that's when you take away our electoral vote independence and sign on to a letter. That's when you vote against bipartisan legislation that would have addressed gun safety and gun violence. That's when you co-sponsor the most extreme abortion ban in the Constitution, not once, not twice, but 3 different times, with no exceptions, for the life of the mother, rape, or incest. And then when you increase taxes on the middle class and continually to make it hard for working class families to be able to afford their health care, and say hell yes to repealing 700,000 Nebraskans' coverage for pre-existing conditions, we get to hold you accountable this fall and November for voting against Nebraskans. Thank you so much for participating in democracy. I appreciate you, and I hope I can earn your vote this November 5th.
Thank you, guys.
Gentlemen, thank you for agreeing to the debate, letting voters know where you stand. Good luck on Election Day. Special thanks to the Press Club here, as well as the League of Women Voters, and everyone behind the scenes with 6 News making this happen. I'm Brian Mastre. Please vote.